Those are track too. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started in a few minutes. I know some of you have pamphlets and programs. If you need a program, they're on the other side of the door in the entryway. We're going to get started in just a moment. The more of course, how could I possibly miss it? It was my life for the last 8 years.
Exciting to see it come to fruition.
Wow, we got clearance from the health department. First patient's in June 23rd.
Hope not to visit it.
Yes, you and me both.
Yep. I'm not going to argue with her.
You don't do well. Friday night services.
I'm not arguing with her.
I tried to remind if you remember the question. So we can practice.
Riding a motorcycle, are we?
She's got a slow leak in the car, so I left in my car.
He was supposed to be selling. Now he is no longer.
Go to the South Carolina.
I gave up the bike. Too nervous.
Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yeah, good. It is a joy for a number of reasons to be able to meet today for our, what used to be a biennial consultation on conscience. We used to do this every other year, and in the in-between years, the URJ would have their consultation on conscience. We've been doing this for decades now. Our first speaker was Loretta Scott King many years ago, and we've had many wonderful people come and grace us with their presence, talking about deep social issues that we as Jews should be working on and identifying. And we did that every other year until COVID. And then we delayed it a year because COVID should only last a year. And 1 year turned into 2, then we finally got one up and running, and then we had another one scheduled 2 years later, and Neil Katyal was going to join us last year, and then something occurred in his life that prevented him from being here. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that he wanted to defend downline ballot in New Jersey, and we were hot to asking questions about that, but I'm sure it had nothing to do with that. And here we are this year for our consultation on conscience, as we're going to get back to our every other year cycle. I should note that while we got up and running, we beat the URJ to it, because after we announced our consultation in conscience this May, the Union for Reform Judaism announced that this December there'll be a consultation on conscience in DC, where we're going to be able to lobby our politicians and stand up for what we believe as Jews we need in this world. And there are a few things that we find lacking as Jews from our government right now, and we want to hold their feet to the fire. So please go on to the URJ's, or the RAC.org, RAC.org, to sign up and join me, as well as a bunch of other people going down to DC for our consultation on conscience. It'll be a fantastic, powerful weekend. I think it's December 15th, 16th, 17th of this coming year. Anne's giving me a look. I'm pretty sure that's it, but she's going to check me. So that's the first reason why I'm excited that we're joined here today. The second reason why I'm excited that we're joining here today is that I'm wrong, Anne? What are the dates?
12 through 15.
12th through 15th. I was so close. It's the 12th through 15th of December. The 15th through the 17th month has been the last time. The second reason why I'm really excited that we're here today is we're talking about mental health as a social justice imperative. And I believe too infrequently are we speaking about mental health from a Jewish perspective. There are many of these taboos that we have in Judaism where we believe the stereotypes that we place, that others place on us are true. Like we're all smart, we're not alcoholics, we don't have mental disease or disorder, nobody is abusive to their spouses. That doesn't happen in Jewish homes. When in reality, we need to be talking about mental health just like everyone else. And often in society as a whole, we aren't addressing mental health issues. And it's time that we do so in a really powerful way. And how do we change the paradigm of how we think about mental health in terms of criminal justice, in terms of providing interventions, whether the police are the right people to be providing interventions or not. These are all topics that we need to really talk with and sit with and dwell with if we're going to create a society worthy of God's presence. So for all those reasons and more, I'm very excited that our three speakers are here with us today. I'll introduce them in a moment, but first I know Toby Kleinman is here and would like to speak a little bit about our Kleinman Consultation on Conscience and the history of how it's gotten here, and two wonderful people in her life, Milton and Gertrude, who this is named after, and how they really believed in the cause of social justice in Tikkun Olam, and how they have left an indelible fingerprint upon this temple and upon this program. So Toby, bavakasha, please come on.
Move this, I think, a little bit. Take off the mask. So I'm real. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Baisley, honored guests, friends, the consultation committee, and everyone who has joined us here today. would like to take you on a brief journey with me to remind each of us how appropriate Anshe Emeth's celebration of ethics, morality, and conscience is, and why, when Bob and I endowed the consultation, that we named it after my parents, the Gertrude and Milton Kleinman Consultation on Conscience. In 2006, I looked out, actually they were sitting right there, to see both my parents here as I introduced the first consultation that carries their name. My families have a strong history. My maternal grandparents fled Romania, which was a growing fascist regime at the time. Fascism, for those who may not know, is a regime or movement that puts nation above people, using repetitive slogans, presenting complex ideas in simple slogans to raise them up and to lower others. Fascism systematically devalues the individual in favor of easily isolated categories of people. Stands for centralized, autocratic government headed by a dictatorial type leader, the suppression of opposition, by someone who is intolerant with normal freedoms, who refuses to engage with the opposition in his country with actual intent to meet solutions, who abandons the truth, not only by lying, but by ridiculing the value of truth. The result is that individuals and groups find themselves isolated, misunderstood, and excluded from normal discourse, and neighborhoods have within one another. They're unheard, they're afraid. George Orwell, in his book 1984, created a world in which fear was used as a tool for manipulating and controlling individuals who do not conform to the prevailing ideology. Many see that as a blueprint for current events. My parents exemplified lives of conscience and taught their 5 children and their grandchildren to speak their minds and raise their voices and never accept tyranny. We were taught to fight back and to speak truth. My parents did this openly in the face of oppression, as when my father stood up against Joe McCarthy and left a job because he refused to take an oath. As when my mother organized opposition to both the war in Vietnam before it was popular to do so, and in support of civil rights. Today, while both my parents are of blessed memory, it is still fitting that this consultation carries both of their names. They were living examples of conscience. Indeed, my mother's motto was, in matters of conscience, you just do what you have to do. My parents were political, they were civil-minded, they openly opposed the death penalty. Dad stood public vigil in New York the night the Rosenbergs were put to death in 1953. Mother was a power. A woman's liber egalitarian before it was popular, long before it was popular. A woman who stood up for what she believed, who stood fearlessly for the downtrodden, performed many unpopular civic activities, including starting a nursery school for poor children in downtown New Brunswick when it was very unpopular. Interestingly, as I understand it, that nursery program actually ultimately became one of the models for Head Start. My father was a quiet man. He had a sustainable strength that comes from harnessing the power of his convictions, a sense of right and wrong, that came from an affirmative struggle to understand what is right, and a commitment to action to bring about those things which he believed. Dad was a psychologist, first for the VA after serving in the Army in World War II. While at the VA, he fought for veterans to have mental health care and other health benefits long before it was popular to do so. I recall hearing about my dad standing with Paul Robeson when a huge mob threw rocks at him while my dad stood as part of a human circle to let Paul Robeson Robeson sing when he was not allowed in a hall to sing at Peekskill. My parents exemplified lives of conscience and taught their children and grandchildren to speak their minds. Their impact was profound. Marcia and John, two of my siblings, followed in my dad's footsteps and became psychologists. Marcia worked to protect adult and child victims of domestic violence and learned how cruel the world can be, as she was targeted for doing so. But that did not stop her. She holds her head up high. She went back to school, became a rabbi, and continues to do civic-minded and important work. My sister Margaret, of blessed memory, became a social worker to help others. And my brother Chuck, hi Chuck. We didn't see you, just looked good. Became a pediatrician who works.
I was waiting for my cue.
Oh, there you go. With work involved in public health and public policy. The song, "What is America to Me," sung by Paul Robeson, exemplifies what Gertrude and Milton Kleinman worked so hard for, and as people of conscience, what I believe we still seek. As Paul Robeson sang in part, I don't sing. What is America to me? A name, a map, the flag I see. A certain word, democracy. What is America to me? The howdy and the handshake, the air of feeling free, and the right to speak my mind out. That's America to me. The house I live in, my neighbors, white and black, the people who just came here and from generations back, but especially the people. That's America to me. That song was not only a favorite of my parents, but was written by Abel Meeropol, the adopted father of Robert Meeropol, who was the speaker at the first Gertrude and Milton Kleinman Consultation on Conscience, and was orphaned by the execution of his parents, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Today, we bring together people of conscience. Our honored speakers, Dr. Lenore Walker, Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, Senator Lesniak, all of whom I am proud to call friend. Each has a long career of fighting for the welfare of others. Dr. Lenore Walker, my dear friend, the psychologist, did the original research on the battered women syndrome, and I know you'll get more of an intro later, Lenore. She did it though here at Rutgers, and I'm sure a lot of people don't realize that. And who has been fighting for the welfare of battered women and victimized children since the 80s. Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, another dear friend, lives the importance of mental health all day, every day, as she gives mental health care rather than punishment in the court where she is a judge. Judge Ginger was and continues to be in the first diversionary mental health court in the country, since the 90s, right, Ginger? Senator Lesniak, another person I proudly call my friend, is a champion of human rights and animal rights, and continues to help the next generation of leaders through the Lesniak Institute. We are here today to provoke all of our consciences, and there is no better group of people to talk about mental health as a social justice issue and imperative than our three honored guests today. I ask each of you to think, compare, and have a consultation with your conscience, how you, as an individual, can become a champion for mental health for all. Finally, I want to give a special tribute to my beloved husband, Robert Adler, blessed memory, who grew up in Highland Park, was bar mitzvah here at Anshe Yemen, and with me endowed this consultation. He too was a stalwart of conscience, worked for the rights of all as he championed civil rights as a lawyer for over 50 years. As I welcome our speakers to the 2025 consultation, and I do hope we do this by anonymity, as Rabbi Aisley said. I close this introduction, as has been my custom, with some of the words of a children's song sung to me as a young child by my parents. It is as apt today as it was over 70 comes from a collection of songs called Songs for Democracy. And just, I'm not gonna sing it, I'm just gonna say it in part. If each little kid could have fresh milk each day, if each working man had enough time to play, if each homeless soul had a good place to stay, it would be a wonderful world. If we could consider each other a neighbor, friend, brother, or sister, it would be a wonderful, wonderful world. It would be a wonderful world. If there were no poor and the rich were content, if strangers were welcome wherever they went, if each of us knew what true brotherhood meant, it would be a wonderful world. It is in support of such a vision that I express my hope, my parents' hope, that this consultation on conscience will move us closer to that goal, that it will stimulate us, we the people, to speak up and to act on our moral obligation to live out our individual and collective conscience. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you to the entire Kleinman family for all the work that went into today. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce our first speaker. Each of our speakers are going to speak, and then we're going to have a panel discussion, and we're going to open up to the congregation questions at the time. All of the speeches, in part, all kind of fit into each other, so we decided to do the questions at the end so that we can have a more holistic approach to having a dialogue. So our first speaker is Raymond Lesniak, who is in the legislature. I'm trying to think of things in here to put in the introduction that Toby didn't mention that will add a little flavor to our background of one of the things that really impressed me was that on September of 2014, there was established the Raymond Lesniak Experience, Strength, and Hope Recovery High School on the Keene University campus. It was inaugurated, designed for youth battling drug and alcohol addiction, which is a remarkable thing to have. Senator Lesniak, who championed the program, has sponsored legislation to start similar schools in New Jersey. And in addition, he is the author of several books and the recipient of multiple awards all around his work trying to provide good mental health resources for individuals. Senator, it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today. I hope the shoulder replacement recovery continues smoothly, and I hope we don't add to that soreness this morning. Bakasha, please come on.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Toby, that was so moving. Oh my God. So, by the way, Rabbi, you did not mention that I won a Human Rights Award in France, an international competition of lawyers, and my speech was how the death penalty is a deprivation of human rights. And one of the judges was Nelson Mandela. How cool is that? And Rabbi, I can't help myself. I just can't. At an Orthodox wedding, the mother of the bride is pregnant. At a Reform wedding, the bride is pregnant. No. At a conservative wedding, the bride is pregnant. At a Reform wedding, the rabbi is pregnant. All right. So I'm going to start with a story from former Union County Prosecutor Ted Romanko. By the way, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good? All right, thank you. When I began my tenure as prosecutor, this is Prosecutor Romanko, I did not realize the extent of the number of criminal defendants who were suffering from a serious mental illness. My trial supervisor, Gina Caulfield, now a Superior Court judge, advised me that there were a number of nonviolent defendants, at least 90, who were in need of psychiatric treatment, a place to live and a job, more than being prosecuted. I began studying the plight of the mentally ill in our criminal justice system. I discovered, among other things, that defendants who suffered from serious mental illnesses, SMIs, received longer sentences in jail than than the general population. That SMI defendants were abused in jail by other inmates, and that they were likely to return to jail after release. Is Felipe here? Can you bring me my glasses? I'm still destroyed. It was apparent to me that the nonviolent mentally ill needed an alternative to prosecution. I read about the mental health court and its diversionary program in Kings County, Brooklyn. I decided to go there and see how it worked. The mental health court judge was extremely helpful, and as a result, I came back to Union County convinced New Jersey needed the same type of diversionary system. Around that time, Governor Cody had appointed a mental health task force. I testified before the task force and told them the criminal justice system in New Jersey needed to change to meet the particular circumstances of the severely mentally ill who commit crimes. My office was provided with a grant of $300,000. I used it to hire an assistant prosecutor and to pay Trinitas Hospital for a psychiatric screener who helped diagnose defendants to determine if they were seriously mentally ill. I partnered with Bridgeway Rehabilitation to keep the diverted defendants find jobs, places to live, and most importantly, to help them make certain that they were being treated and taking their medication. As an aside, that's the most difficult thing. These folks get off their meds and then bad things happen. And they need help to make sure that they take them. Next, I requested the assignment judge to assign a judge to handle diversionary matters for mentally ill defendants. The judge would have the defendants appear before him or her periodically to make sure they were taking their meds and cooperating with caseworkers in probation and at the Bridgeway Rehabilitation. The program was designated as the Special Offenders List and was the first in the state. I then retained Dr. Kenneth Gill, a professor at UMDNJ, to study the results of diversion of the mentally ill from criminal prosecution. Dr. Gill's report recommended, I quote, continuing the current program and consider an expansion into other counties and possibly other states. The 131 persons enrolled in the study had a diagnosis of a serious mental illness, with 58% also having a co-occurring substance abuse disorder. Many had several previous arrests and convictions and had served jail and or prison time. In the first year of follow-up, participation in the program significantly reduced time spent in jail or prison compared to their previous history. Indeed, those who successfully completed the program had lower rearrest than non-participants and those who did not finish the program. Furthermore, those that completed the program, which was approximately 2 years, had increased their global level of functioning, coping skills, and integration into the community. Now remember, these are folks who committed crimes. Survival analysis revealed that those who completed the program were much more likely not to be incarcerated throughout the 5-year follow-up. Needless to say, the program was a huge success. I am giving a copy of the report to Rabbi Baisley to distribute to anyone who wants to see it in more detail. That would be you, Toby. However, Prosecutor Romanko initiative also produced an interbranch advisory committee on mental health initiatives established by the New Jersey Supreme Court, Chief Justice Rabner, which has submitted a report in December 2012, which I will also leave with the rabbi, that made 17 recommendations to improve the judiciary's response to individuals with mental illnesses who have been entangled in the justice system. By the way, I reached out to the Chief Justice to see how many of these recommendations have been initiated. I didn't get a response. So my guess, and I've been told, maybe about a third of them. 10 years later, it takes a long time to get new ideas and new approaches to solving a problem, doesn't it? The state of New Jersey is finally building on Prosecutor Romanko's successful program in Union County and implementing some of the report's recommendations 10 years later. On December 23rd, 2023, not long ago, right? Governor Murphy signed S-524, sponsored by Senator Ruiz, which creates a diversionary program in 3 counties for anyone diagnosed as severely mentally disabled who committed a crime of the 3rd or 4th degree that did not involve violence or a threat of violence. Now this is 2023, right? We started this program 10 years ago in Union County. But anyway, finally the legislature got around to doing something about it. As they say here, I can't explain why it has taken the state so long to recognize that the mentally ill need to be treated differently from the general population in the criminal justice system, since it was proved so successful in Union County. But Senator Ruiz's legislation is a big step in the right direction. I'm confident our Attorney General, Matthew Platkin, will rigorously see to its implementation. I'm not so sure about that. I called up the Attorney General, said, I'm gonna mention this. Has this been established yet? No response. But I will follow up, right, Toby? You know that. Okay, so I'll end with this story from Monroe Township. Last week, Sergeant Justice Caruso and officers Wesley Panari and Mark Kramer responded to a welfare check where they encountered an uncooperative man experiencing a mental health crisis. He made multiple threats to harm officers if they attempted to enter the bedroom. The officers attempted to talk to the man, but a short while after the communication ceased, they saw smoke coming from the bedroom. The officers decided to force the entry, despite the threats of violence to them, due to the danger the fire posed. The officers found the man armed with a knife, and after safely subduing him, they removed him from the burning room. Now, I ask, is society better off by prosecuting this guy for multiple offenses that would send him to prison for 3 to 5 years or more? Or should he be referred for mental health treatment with supervised appearances before a judge to ensure he's getting the treatment needed and taking his medication as prescribed? That's for you to decide. Thank you. I'm gonna have to go down there. Oh no, there is no stair. Oh yeah, there's a ramp over there. I can handle it. Watch. Whoa, no problem.
Thank you, Senator. Each one of our speakers are just so impressive that I know in my introductions to them I'm going to be leaving something off, and that's certainly going to be the case with Dr. Lenore Walker, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time because she has such an accomplished history. Dr. Lenore Walker is a pioneer in the field of trauma-informed care. It was her research on the battered women syndrome that introduced it to the courts during the 1970s. She is a graduate of Rutgers University, which we're all very proud of, where she received her doctorate and first began her research on battered women. Dr. Walker is a professor emerita from Nova Southeastern University College of Psychology. She has published over 25 books and numerous professional book chapters and journal entries. Currently, she maintains a small independent practice of forensic psychology. I believe is the director of the Domestic Violence Institute. And she just returned from a 3-week trip to Israel, where she brought a mission of 20 mental health providers to study Jewish trauma and resilience for the Association of Jewish Psychologists. For everything I mentioned, I'm sure there are 2 or 3 things that are equally impressive that I didn't mention. So it is an honor to have Dr. Walker with us today.
Thank you. It is such an honor to be here, back in New Brunswick. I don't recognize it after being gone for 50 years. It's really revived. It was very exciting to be back here again. And with the Kleinman family, my dearest friends, Toby and Marcia, Chuck, and I knew Gert and Milt very well as well. We had many discussions about the kind of work that we all really believed was necessary to do to Kunalam, to try to repair the world. I actually was in Ansha Emeth when I lived in East Brunswick several times. I don't remember it. I'm sorry. It is very different, I hope, but it is a pleasure. And meeting Jay Reba, who was my next door neighbor, he and his then wife and I, and raised our children together. We're really close friends. So my history here really has been very emotional for me. I did start my graduate work at Rutgers and did get my degree and worked at the medical school when it first opened up in Piscataway for several years. And then my family, my husband and I broke up and I went to Denver, Colorado. And that's really where my career working with domestic violence began. Not because I studied it here, and it was the years, we're talking now back in the early 1970s, when the feminist movement was really very much in power, especially here. East Brunswick had a very feminist mayor at the time, and we were dealing with the kinds of issues both in our university, in our home, and trying to empower women. So it was natural for me as a psychologist to really start working with women, and women who would come in and talk to me about being abused. I was one of 5 women on the faculty at the medical school in those years, and I went to my colleagues, and the psychology faculty was very large because all the Rutgers schools got the psychology faculty together, and I offered, does anybody else have anybody who comes into them who's a battered woman? And all of them said no. Yeah, we have some women who are being abused, but they really didn't identify what we were talking about at the time, and what was about safety in people's homes. And so I just started following up. I started doing interviews. My family lived in Florida, so I went to interview some older people to get a sample, and the women there started talking about the abuse that went on in their houses. And I learned how to interview, to get the kind of information that people did not get when you didn't ask the right questions and you didn't allow people to really tell you what their life was like. And then I started writing, I started presenting, and in Colorado, because I had a congresswoman, Pat Schroeder, who many of you may remember, said to me, why don't you write a grant to the National Institute of Mental Health? I'll try to help you get it and study battered woman syndrome, which is what I was calling it. Why? Because it was we were talking about child abuse syndrome in those days. You know, until 1972, we did not have child abuse laws in this country. So yes, Senator, it takes a long time to implement what we've been trying to implement. And so I did write the grant. I did get $250,000 back in those days. I don't know if I would have gotten it had I stayed in New Jersey, because grants from the government are done regionally. They like to make sure that people in different regions get it, and so Colorado didn't have as many other successful researchers there as we had here. At any rate, that's a long kind of history to talk about how I got involved with women who kill in self-defense, which was the kind of title I said I would talk about. Well, I met Marcia, Kleinman, and John at a psychology meeting, and they introduced me to Toby, and Toby introduced me to some of the clients that she was working with, battered women who were trying to protect their children because they were being told by the courts that they had to share custody with partners who were abusive and who were not dealing with trying to stop their abuse. And the power struggles that went on became triangulated. Now it became not only the men and women, but the court getting involved. And unfortunately, the courts were not listening to experts and didn't know who was an expert and who could tell them what to do. And so that got me more involved in forensic psychology. I had been a clinician, I had been an academic, I had been a teacher, and that's the nice thing about getting a doctoral degree, is that you have that flexibility of being able to do different kinds of things. And I went out to a conference where they asked me to speak. It was at the University of Washington in Seattle, and there were reporters in the audience. I didn't realize that. I was kind of naive at the time. And they said to me, somebody asked a question and said, you know, everything you're saying about helping to stop domestic violence in people's homes is going to be long-term. It's social change. There are women being killed every single day. What are you going to do about that? So, in my naivete, I said, well, if anybody's going to in danger of being killed, then they ought to strike back. And if they kill them, I'll help provide a defense. The next exactly. The next day, the news headlines were, noted psychologists will defend battered women who kill. I went back to my home and office in Colorado, and by the time I got back there was a phone call from a lawyer in Billings, Montana. Now, you know, I grew up in New York City where open spaces are up, not out. The lawyer said, well, I have a woman who just killed her abusive husband. Will you come and defend her? He said, look, I spoke out of turn. The only time I was ever in court before was for a divorce and to pay a parking ticket. I don't know what I'm talking about. And he said, well, do you know anything about the psychology of a battered woman? I said, yes. There's not a lot yet, but what there is, I know. he said, well, I've been a lawyer for so many years, I'll teach you what you need to know in the courtroom. And that was the best bargain I ever made. It really began my career. So I went to Montana, I evaluated the woman, I went to court, and I testified in court, and a jury of 13 people found her not guilty. She was charged with first-degree murder. That's empowering, right? I felt so good about that. The next day, I get back to my office, and there's a phone call from a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This time, the headline in the Billings Gazette, the lawyer in DC's mother read it and said, oh, you know that client you've been talking to me about in DC, why don't you hire this woman? And so they called me. I went to Washington, DC. I evaluated the woman. I found her to be a battered woman and that she acted in what I considered was self-defense. And I go to testify in federal court, because in those days, DC was federal court, not state court. And all of a sudden, the U.S. attorney gets up and says, objects, and says, I object to this witness. I had no notice about this witness, and it was all kinds of legal stuff that I didn't quite understand. Dismissed the jury, and the judge listened to what I had to say, a proffer of my testimony in court, and he decided that it was too new, too novel, and wouldn't admit my testimony. That was the best thing that could happen, because legally it went up on appeal, and the appellate court found that it is beyond the knowledge of the average juror to know about that psychology, and that an expert with the right credentials should be allowed to testify. And that, because it was federal court, that had standing across the country. But of course it didn't get in that easily. In the 1980s, because I had been allowed to testify, I would have been allowed, the decision had come down, I traveled from state to state to state on what they call first impression cases to try to get that testimony admitted for women. And one of the reasons why, a second reason why I like doing that, is because when you looked at those cases, they were really so bad. You could find all the places that you could have intervened earlier so that it didn't get to that point. And so that was what I wrote most about, and how to prevent it from getting to people losing their lives, and to be able to stop that kind of abuse. I went back to, after I got tired of traveling all around the country, I moved from Denver to Florida, and went on the faculty at Nova Southeastern University, and began my research up all over again with my graduate students, and spent 20 years on that faculty, really doing that kind of research, training more people to go out and to be able to do it, and developing treatment programs for the prisons. And so I've had contracts with the Department of Justice, and our 15 federal prisons that house women, 3 years ago, introduced our Survivor Therapy Empowerment Program, our STEP program, into those prisons, so that women who were serving time, we've also tried to get some of them released, but even those who are still there could have the benefit of treatment while they're there, so that when if they are released, they will be able to come back into society without some of the trauma effects. So it's been quite a journey in all kinds of different places. I did some very big, high publicity cases. You know, a lot of my work, I've been a strong feminist, but I took on the O.J. Simpson case to be his psychologist back in the mid-1990s, and got crucified by the feminist movement. They were furious with me. They felt I was abandoning them I wanted to learn what is in a batterer's mind, you know, and that's one of the ways to be able to get the psychology to figure out how can we prevent it. I fortunately, never had to testify in the trial. By the time they were ready to use my testimony, I would have testified that yes, he was a batterer, but there was no clear evidence that he killed her. That thank God, not every batterer kills their women, and that you need other evidence. And that trial, that case, really, I knew enough about law by then, was not gonna end well, no matter what my testimony would have been. And fortunately, the jurors were dropping off, and Johnny Cochran, who was a delight to work with, he was a real master lawyer, I did not have to testify. I did testify in the civil case in a deposition, so my on record, what I would have said is still there, but, so I learned a lot, as I went through a lot of these different kinds of cases and different testimony, but I couldn't really talk about a lot of it. It's partly because of confidentiality that we have in the psychology profession, and partly because I wasn't sure I was really going to retire. I still am not retired, even at my age, I'm still working, and so I didn't really want to say all of the things I could say openly. And so instead, in my retirement from the university, I have now started writing murder mysteries. I am having the best time putting down everything I wanted to say that I couldn't say. And so if any of you are interested, I brought one of them. This is, of course, my alter ego character is a forensic psychologist. And this is called Murder in Hong Kong. This is loosely based on a case that I actually did in Hong Kong. And you may be interested in reading it. I'm giving the rabbi a copy of it for the shul, so that you can certainly borrow it, or you can get it on Amazon, whenever you like. I want to close by saying my latest passion, which has been helping form the Association of Jewish Psychologists. We started forming it even before October 7th. My own grandchildren spent a lot of time in Israel. My middle grandson did a gap year there and came home right in 2021 when there was another incident where the sirens were blasting, and there was anti-Semitism in our psychology profession that nobody was really dealing with. You know, many people think psychology is filled with Jewish people, but it was at one time, but it's not any longer. And so we really need to clean it up a little bit. So we did some research I was on the APA Council of Representatives for 23 years until they kicked me off because I was too old. Ageism is rampant there as well. But I decided I'm not done yet, and so with several others, we formed the Association of Jewish Psychologists. And many of us are still working within the APA to try to clean up their anti-Semitism, but we're also working with Israel. And so we just came back. I also was just selected, President Herzog has formed a new group called the Voice of the People, 150 delegates from around the world, 50 from the United States, 50 from Israel, and 50 from the rest of the world, to try to help chart the future of Israel and what kinds of relationships we want with one another. It's really a think tank of sorts, and we all got together in March in Israel, and let me tell you, Israel is safer than New York to go to it these days. I know lots of people are frightened by it, and certainly I have nothing nice to say about the government, but the people are wonderful. And the work we're doing, I brought 20 psychologists, as Rabbi said, with me, and we went all over the country looking at resilience centers. And our people are brilliant. We are doing so much work that I'm now embarking on revising our trauma theory here in the United States to incorporate a lot of the work, the resilience that we're working. We had to name battered women syndrome as a mental health problem in order to get it into the legal system, in order to get what we needed for help. And resilience centers are saying, rightly so, that not every trauma survivor needs therapy. Many of them need to be back in a natural setting because trauma means you're overwhelmed emotionally. And so what you need is the calm down. And different people need different ways of calming down. And we need to figure out ways to identify that and provide a continuum of services so that only those who really need the mental health support of well-trained specialists have it available, and that all of the others of us who are traumatized daily find other ways within our society to calm ourselves down. And so I'm anxious to get back home and start writing again and publishing. So thank you so much for listening.
Right now, my main concern is when we have our discussion, how do we end at a time that's still appropriate to call the meal that we're going to have afterwards lunch and not dinner? Our third and final speaker is Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, and she has been a Broward County Court judge since 1997, where she pioneered America's first specialized mental health court. That's just remarkable. I want to say that again. Where she pioneered America's first specialized mental health court. She is a national and international speaker on mental health, criminal justice, and trauma-informed courts. She has won numerous recognitions and awards. She was recently recognized as Community Champion of Mental Health by the Broward County United Way. Yes, this is, there's so much to say about Judge Lerner-Wren. I think the quote that I want to leave us with is from actor Daryl Hammond. I really want to know how this quote came to be, but he likened the judge's contributions to the quality of life of people with mental health challenges to that of the Wright brothers' contribution to modern flight. She is a phenomenal individual and judge, and I am so deeply honored that you're here to speak with us this morning.
And thank you so much, Rabbi and Senator. It's such a joy to meet you. And also just to be back together with my friends, Toby and Lenore. You know, we've spoken all over the country so many times, but it's been a while since we've been all together. So it's just an immense joy. And you know, I was thinking coming into New Jersey, I have family from Cherry Hill. My grandmother, my grandparents lived in Northeast Philadelphia, and my grandmother was a very, her name was Esther Sklar, and she was a very early leader, one of the early presidents of her conservative shul in Philadelphia, very uniquely special woman. A terrific leader who always instilled in me the knowledge, you know, that I can make a difference in the world. And of course, we all have a duty, correct, to repair the world. So this is for my grandmother. And, you know, I was thinking about the court. I was thinking about the genesis of the court. And I remember when I got on the bench, I, you know, was really very excited, but I remember that I got invited to, you know, a mental health substance use program that was at one of the, you know, really beautiful Marriott ballrooms and in Orlando, and went to this particular program, and I was listening. It was very early, very early in my judgeship, and I was listening to the speaker, an expert in the field, and the speaker started talking about the criminalization of people with serious mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders. And I have to tell you something, we never learned about this in law school. I went to Nova Southeastern University. I'm also an adjunct professor, thank you, doctor, for 20 years in forensic psychology. But I remember sitting in this ballroom, and I have to tell you, I had some kind of experience. I did, I'll admit it. If you want to see me after, we can. And I was sitting, listening to the speaker, hearing and thinking, well, wait a minute. You mean people that are ill are getting arrested and put in jail because of an illness? And all of a sudden, you know, the big ballroom lights started really like glaring, you know, and it seemed like the walls were like moving. I swear to God, I just really had this incredible experience. It was unforgettable. I mean, I didn't take medication or anything. I just remember it so vividly. And I remember coming home back to Broward County and thinking to myself, just intuitively, you know, this has to change. This just has to change. We cannot be arresting people that are ill. And sure enough, about the same time that I had this particular experience, little did I know that there were criminal justice stakeholders in the public defender's office and in the jail system that were recognizing the overrepresentation of people being arrested with serious mental illnesses. And they formed a task force, an ad hoc community-based task force. I wasn't on that task force at the time, but they met and they met and they met actually for several years, until finally, out of frustration, one of the judges that was leading the task force went to the public defender, very famous public defender, Howard Finkelstein, in Broward County, that had his own news show. Help me, Howard. He was quite the celebrity. And to make a long story short, you know, the circuit judge looked at Howard and goes, "What is it that you want already?" And Howard goes, "You know, I want my own specialized court." And they knew I had training. I am a former public guardian. I don't know if you have that position. But in Broward County, we had that. It was actually a probate position that for individuals who were deemed by the probate court to be incapacitated to proceed, that didn't have any family and were indigent, it would be my role as public guardian. I love that name, it's so heady. And to make sure that they get their benefits, make sure that their medical needs are met, etc. Even their death arrangements was my responsibility. And I really flourished in that role prior also to coming to the bench. But Broward's Mental Health Court, I think, is extremely uniquely special. And I'll tell you why. First of all, it is based on the premise, first of all, that recovery is real, that treatment works, the court is voluntary, we don't use any probation, we don't use anything. We just really make that interpersonal connection, that we care about you, that we care about you, and that you deserve access to care. You deserve to have access to care and access to treatment from an evidence-based vantage point. Why? Because recovery is real. You know, a lot of families, I served, we just rotated out, I served on the mental health court for close to 30 issues to, of course, design the court. And I'm very pleased, Senator, to just say and recognize that I was this county rollout, and Judge Emmerich is a dear friend of mine for many, many years. And the central piece of the mental health court is really based on a philosophy called therapeutic jurisprudence. Therapeutic jurisprudence. You know, it's a really hard, kind of long title, and I know that the creators, two amazing law professors who were at the University of Miami Law School, devised this concept, if you will, that if people are listened to, if people in court are given voice, if people feel that they have in fact been heard, then more than likely than not, there'll be more orders. And if the court's orders, for example, are, you know, listen, you know, we're going to link you with care in the community, we're going to honor preferences, we're going to promote dignity, we're going to promote respect and compassion, that they in fact will be more than likely to adhere and accept the court's rulings. And sure enough, that concept works. That TJ concept works. And I'm so proud. I just can't even tell you. We have diverted over 35,000 people out of Broward's jail. And we did it without any money. We did it with no grants, no funding. We did it with what I define as a courageous community. Stakeholders that all of us agreed together as a community, as a county, that, yeah, we've got to come together and we've got to get these people linked with services over incarceration. And yeah, you can clap to me. It's amazing. And it has been, I don't know, the joy of a lifetime to innovate, to Lenore, to help our students, right, to understand the impact of abuse, the impact of trauma, and that what we know from you, Dr. Gold, and all the other experts is that people can recover from trauma and live fabulous lives. So I look forward to our panel discussion. Rabbi, thank you again for the joy of being here, and we'll see you on the panel.
Well, I'm going to invite you to come back up and to join us over here so we can begin our panel discussion.
By the way, I had shoulder separation surgery a couple weeks ago. A misspent youth.
Test, can you hear me? That's good, microphone's good? Okay, great. So I'm gonna hold on to this microphone over here and give this one to you guys to pass around. I'm gonna start by saying, I've had US senators in my home, I've challenged politicians, I've kept their feet to the fire, I've spoken in different arenas and on TV, but I gotta say right now, I'm feeling way out of my league. And rather nervous that the questions I might even utter make sense. So thankfully, Senator Lesniak was so taken by Dr. Walker's presentation that he asked, when the time is appropriate, can I ask the first question? So I'm gonna give him the microphone for the first question.
Well, thank you, and this is gonna be a little controversial, Dr. Walker.
Okay.
So, because you did a study on the batterer, right? And how to treat the batterer, and you got a little controversy over that, correct?
Well, I didn't do the study.
Okay,
I just worked with a client who was a batterer.
okay, but
And it was clinical work,
it was clinical work, because,
and I got a lot of controversy.
well, here's another one. How about doing a study on what makes an anti-Semite? Right?
I love that question. I love that question, because that's one of the missions of the Association of Jewish Psychologists, is to really look at it. And we wrote a proposal for the National Academies of Science and Medicine at NASM, to look at that. We have a lot of research on prejudice and how people developmentally, from childhood on to adults, become prejudiced. But we don't have it specific to anti-Semitism. And so we wrote the proposal, we went to one of the departments in NASM, they loved it. They actually combined it with another department because two of the groups want to do the study. It costs about $2 million, and we're now in the process of trying to raise funds. So if you know any philanthropists who would like that study, please see me. I will get them to the right people, because we need those data.
And this wasn't a setup question. We didn't talk about it. Oh, okay, yeah.
I think, so wonderful first question right there, and thrilled to hear about that study, because that's something that affects all of us right now. I think, Judge, you said something that I think was a thread that wove through everyone's presentation, but also the purpose of our consultation in general and a lot of the work of the synagogue, which is saying that it all begins with the statement that we care about you and want you to receive care. And I think that is, I think what's lacking with a lot of mental health interventions in America right now is this lack of care and concern, and how do we treat somebody differently. I think part of what was mentioned earlier that's important is prevention as a first step. How do we prevent this from happening? How do we stem this off from the very beginning and make sure people are on the right track for the care and concern they need to not get to a boiling point or a point of no return? I was wondering, perhaps for each of you, where you see those points of prevention as things that we should be aware of and we should be advocating for to get it part of our institutional change. Because a lot of this is cultural change, but cultural change only works if there's institutional change as well.
That is so true, Rabbi, and such a important question. So first of all, I just think it's really necessary to just kind of talk about the impact of stigma that we have surrounding mental illness fundamentally, because the prevalence of mental health is so high. I mean, it's 1 in 5, it's very common, and yet there is so much stigma surrounding mental illness and mental health problems that you find people not willing to share, not willing to talk about it, not willing to seek help. What we started, and I'm really thrilled about this as well, in terms of points of prevention, what I noticed through all the years in the court is that family members were coming into court with their loved ones, because remember, I'm not a juvenile court, I'm an adult court, and they would all say the same thing to me in exactly the same way. Judge, we just didn't know what to do. We just didn't know what to do. And then, of course, one thing leads to another. Illnesses progress, it gets out of hand, something happens, boom, they're in jail. And, you know, the issue really, I believe, and I'm so grateful to the Broward County United Way. I sit on the Board of Governors there for a very long time. They have been so wonderful to me. But what we've done is we've started a mental health literacy initiative in Broward County. It's called Be Healthy Broward. And the goal is to educate, inform families, individuals throughout our entire community, throughout the workplace, about mental health issues, problems, and more important, about the importance of early intervention. Early intervention is, in fact, Rabbi, its own structural prevention. Because we know I was very fortunate in 2001. I was appointed by then President George Bush Jr. to serve on only the second United States Commission on Mental Health, the first one under late President Jimmy Carter, the second one under President Bush, where I chaired the subcommittee on criminal justice. And, you know, we understand that the longer people delay care, the less likely they are to seek care. And so early intervention is everything. It's important for families to know where to help seek, how to help seek, where the resources are, where your community mental health centers are, and you know, who to call if you need information on those resources. One last thing, I want to go back, Senator, if I may, to what you talked about with regards to, you know, the issue of crisis response. And because you brought up fundamentally what is one of still the most important critical issues that we are trying to just respond to in a way where no longer will people that are having some kind of mental health episode be subject, for example, to be looked upon as somebody dangerous, and then somehow one thing happens, you know, after, you know, and a law enforcement officer takes out their gun and the person is gone. And I've written about this in Huffington Post so many times. I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of blogging, I'm on social media, I'm on Blue Sky. Please feel free to join me and follow me. You know, I remember writing about one day in Dade County, Miami, where a young man who was just recently released, discharged from, you know, a crisis, acute care crisis center, that he was seen in front of his house. What was he doing? He was taking a broom, and he was like swinging a broom in a very erratic way, and the mother not really, you know, even thinking it's possible that if she calls police for help, that they're gonna come to the property, see what's happening with her adult, you know, young adult son, and then kill him. And so we're trying to move away from the law enforcement model and really move toward a therapeutic crisis response model throughout the United States. It's not easy to do because we're short in terms of clinicians, quite frankly. But we do have crisis response models in Broward County, crisis teams, clinical teams that will even come to the courtroom. I've called them many a time. They'll come, they'll assess, for those that might be in peril of suicide, etc., or harming themselves, or they're just need acute care, stabilization. So, we do have structures in place, but we need more, and we need everyone's advocacy for these types of response teams that will look to, help and not harm.
I will, but Judge, you sound very much like a progressive, but in some political folks' minds, you would be called a radical. And guess what? We need more radicals. We need more radicals like you, Judge.
And there's some questions.
Working, I want to put a plug in for dealing with abuse early on. But when you look at the people in our prison system, 85 or higher % of them have experienced abuse at some point. This is men and women. And we have a society that's very mobile, and people don't stay together. And when they get divorced, which sometimes is necessary in order to protect people, we need to be very careful about respecting children's right to safety. And when we insist that there's shared parental custody in these homes, we are placing children in a situation where they learn to protect themselves as best they can. But the single most important factor that the research shows about why men batter women is that they saw it in their home and no one stopped it. They abuse because they get what they want and they get away with it. And I'm not suggesting that we need a criminal model for it. I'm suggesting we need to get in early and prevent it. And we need to get away from parental right to the access to their children being primary and children's safety being primary and mother's safety.
Yeah, questions, Mark?
How much of a correlation is there between these sorts of incidents and poverty? That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, at the federal level, we are gutting social support programs. How do we move forward, whether it be for prevention or responsible treatment that is not incarceration?
It's a good question. I'll start with saying that poverty certainly, and deep poverty, plays a big role. And lack of housing and lack of a safety net plays a very big role in what we're talking about. But don't be fooled. I made a lot of money as a therapist working with very wealthy people where these kinds of problems are endemic in their homes as well. So it cuts across every demographic group, as well as Jewish homes, I'm sorry to say, but it is there as well. And we're beginning to recognize it, and I've spent a lot of years working back and forth in Israel with training Jewish therapists there as well. So both here in the United States and in our synagogues. And I think programs like this are so important. The kinds of activities that Judge Lesniak has been telling us about and Toby's been telling us about what happens here. Yes, we are progressive, but even the conservatives work very well with us around violence in the home. And so we need to find ways to have our colleagues join in with us, maybe using different language, but we can get people who want to be safe, want to be happy.
Kevin, did you have a question?
I did. I just want to present a scenario I've come across dozens and dozens of times, and I'm interested in all of your input. So I work in public schools in New Jersey, okay? And so often you talk about early intervention and front lines, so we will have incidents come up that come to, across my desk. And, I will do a threat assessment, risk assessment, a manifestation determination, which is we determine that behaviors are due to a mental health issue. And then we kind of reach that impasse with administration in schools where, that student then needs, we have a zero tolerance policy for threats, for, weapons, violence, anything like that. So those students are then placed on home instruction because they can't come to the public school. And then we are tasked with finding an appropriate place where there's no room anywhere in New Jersey at any decent program. So we either have to place a student in a program that's not appropriate, or leave them home with home instruction that's probably not gonna happen because we don't have instructors. So then we have these students that are in a worse scenario because we determined that their behavior was due to a mental illness. And I'm curious your take on it, and I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, it's just, that's the reality of what we're dealing with.
Broward County is where the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting was. I think everybody probably knows that. I don't think we've recovered from that, quite frankly. So, the gaps, and I think what you're really picking up on, Kevin, because I've sat on threat assessment national panels where these issues with the top, experts on threat assessments and violence and mass violence, was the subject matter. There's a lot of gaps that have to be filled in. And there's some specialized, I think, trainings that need to happen across school districts, across even sheriff's offices, that I still think are not happening. There's also, I think, specialized training just shifting from that issue, and I'll get to in a second, to the mental health side of the coin, is that we've had experiences in our school system, which is really very upsetting, where you have kindergartners who, going back to post-COVID-19 for a second, when, children weren't able to go to school and they had to be home, and their mental health really started suffering because they weren't socializing. So they finally get back to school, but we've had, in our county, a number of kindergartners, for example, that had to be Baker Acted. And then there weren't enough children Baker Act beds. And then all of a sudden you're hearing about kindergartners being handcuffed. And what is Baker Act mean? Oh, of course, involuntary civil commitment. So I'm just letting you know there's a number of gaps, that need to be filled. Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking, do you know of any prevention, like such as putting I'm saying bad, quote unquote, mentally ill people, or people who is not stable enough, recognize it before they go to school, kindergarten, or even employment history, do it before they do any harm, before it get there, because it's not a building, because somebody hit somebody, and boom, it's like right there and then.
Can you repeat the question,
So,
please?
the question is, as I think I understand it, deals with how do you do preventative work in a world where our criminal justice system or our penal system is based upon responding to things that have happened rather than preemptively before they have happened. How do you intercede before something's happened to prevent something bad from happening?
Some of the early work that I did in Latin America is an interesting model to think about, where in the hospital, when a woman gives birth to a child, there's an assessment made what her home life is like and whether she needs assistance. And there are trained people to be able to provide that. They make visits to the home, and they give her support as she's beginning to raise the child. As well, if there's a partner or a husband in the home, then they work with him as well. So they're trained people to do that. It's a model that really says we're in a community, and the community has responsibility to get into people's homes. Even if they don't ask for it, they're granted it. And one of my daughter-in-laws lives in Germany, and in the first year of my grandchildren's lives, she had once a month somebody came to the home and made sure she was doing things and comfortable with how she was raising the children, how she was handling things. And if she wanted it for the first year, it was not voluntary. They had to have it, and they got a supplement of money. And so that's why they accepted it, because they got what they needed from it. So there are these kinds of schemes that we have been able to see in other parts of the world. This country has not been willing to have good daycare. I mean, we know that two families need to work for support. We can't get our legislators to fight for good daycare, and I don't mean you, Senator, but although maybe you want to take that on as the next fight, because you're pretty successful at it. But these are the kinds of things that we need.
Yeah, well, I am shaking my head, and this is also addresses the poverty issue. I've been trying unsuccessfully to get established in New Jersey what are called wraparound community schools, which provides social workers to go into, in low-income districts, to pregnant mothers, to provide prenatal care and post-birth care and education and nutrition, and the most important time in the development of a child's brain is from birth to 3, and they're not getting that, and we can provide that. And as Toby knows, I won't give up trying.
Thank you. I know there are a couple more questions. I want to get to them in just a moment, but there was something that you said, Doctor, that I want to, actually all of you have kind of addressed that I want to bring up. My father of blessed memory, who some of you knew, but might not know that he finished his career as the director of affordable care housing development in New York City, a couple of them actually, where he would provide affordable housing and social workers for those with mental disabilities, which would include having them, making sure that they were taking their medicine and were on the right tracks for doing all the interventions to be able to live happy and productive lives. And I asked him because he came home frustrated many nights with just the program failing their residents every now and then. And I asked him what he thought his biggest challenge was to being able to accomplish the goals of this program. And the answer was New York City. The New York City bureaucracy and all the things that they require are sometimes go against the purpose of the program. And because these bureaucratic laws were written in the 1970s and don't account for modern day understanding of mental health, it's nearly impossible for somebody to go through this program smoothly. So I guess the question to all of you from both a psychological and a legal standpoint and a legislative standpoint, oh my God, the 3 different standpoints in front of me. How do we address the bureaucratic challenges to help create a system that can properly care for people in the right way?
I'm going to jump in if I can. That really is, I think, nationally, the fundamental question in terms of really taking these collaborative systems of care and bringing them together so that they could really effectively not only work together, but have the resources that they need to fill these gaps and solve these problems with regard to social determinants of health, lack of housing, et cetera. You know, I'll give you an example, and it's a terrible, sad example, Rabbi. So but for 12 years, we had a grant. It was a state legislative grant in Florida that granted a 22-bed homeless. It really was not a shelter. It was a series of little homes that belonged to psychiatrists on the campus of South Florida State Hospital in Pembroke Pines, Florida, to the mental health court, to Broward's mental health court, to house people that were homeless through the court. And with this particular project, which I oversaw through the county, I created no limitations for anybody coming in, for any stays. I let people stay as long as they needed to. People stayed in these residences. They had their own kitchen. It was amazing, really gorgeous. I had people coming through the mental health court that actually finished and getting their college degree and then went to work through that process. And I was able, I have to say it, we had transsexual people getting arrested where they couldn't get housing. I made sure they had housing and they were safe through this particular project. And then about 12 years later, without notice to me or any prior knowledge, the county just cut the funding and we lost it. And to me, that was just, you know, one of the worst decisions that I could possibly think of, given the homeless problems that we have in the county. And you can see that there from a political vantage point, you know, people aren't necessarily always thinking about what's in the best interest of those that we really need to serve. Thank you so much.
So let me give you another bad example. So at my recovery school, in order to get these alternative schools created, I had to allow the legislation passed that the administrator approves of a child after being diagnosed with substance use disorder, and even the parents, the child wants to go to a recovery school. By the way, all of our students graduate and go on to some form of higher education. Maybe not necessarily university, but trade schools. These kids who have substance use disorder, if they don't have this type of environment where they can be supported in a safe, sober environment to get an education, they drop out and they wind up in our penal system. But talk about administration, the superintendent must approve of the transfer. We've had 3 cases where the superintendent said no. And that's what we have to deal with, unfortunately, and I'll try to get that passed and that changed as well.
I want to respect, I know the senator has a timeline this morning, a timetable, so I know there.
Shoulders also sore.
I know, I want to give you the care, we're talking about caring for people, I want to give you care. So I know there are a couple more questions out here, so why don't we do 2 more questions, and then I'm going to ask Chuck to sum up before we go to lunch. And when we go to lunch upstairs, everybody's invited to lunch, whether or not you signed up, come on upstairs and we can continue the conversation up there. Andrew.
I'm Andrea Lynn, I'm married to Kevin, and we have a child. He's 16 years old, he is on the autism spectrum. Now, one of the things as parents who also work in healthcare, the mental health care system, we're understandably terrified as our child is about to drive. Now, if our child were to be stopped at a roadside stop, his anxiety is going to go through the roof. He might appear violent or aggressive. All of you who know our child here know that is not the case. He is anxious. East Brunswick Police Department has a program where you can add onto your driver's license that this is an individual with autism. Please act accordingly. I have signed him up for that. But outside of East Brunswick, what do people who are living with autism have? Our fear is that somebody is going to misunderstand our child and something bad is going to happen to him. Are there any specific programs that you know of or things in Broward County or around there to provide support to individuals on the autism spectrum who are interacting with police officers?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to excuse myself, I need some meds on the shoulder. It's starting to hurt really, really bad, so I have to, hey, thank you so much for having me.
You know, what that reminded me of is some of my African American friends who have the talk with their children about how you have to behave if a police officer stops you. It's horrible to think that we have to teach children that way, but I really believe that that's what we have to do. And I love the idea that there's something on the driver's license. I think that's so innovative and clever to be able to do that. And you know, we have to have some place where we can compile all of these kinds of things that we're discovering on our own out of necessity, because it's not being provided for us. So kudos to you.
Toby has a question.
Oh, good.
Lenore, you mentioned safety first. I know you know me and you know I've written about this and been begging it for years. But this is really to you and to Ginger. There is a study which was done at the University of Michigan that over 79% of batterers end up with legal custody of their named abuser by a child, there's a named abuser, where they actually abused the child. Is there a way, is there either a study that I'm unaware of, or is there a way in the alternative jurisprudence to not allow the mental health of the victim, adult victim, where she's been battered, to be attacked in that court? Is there a diversionary way to handle that? I've never really thought of that until today. But it's a very, it shouldn't take,
You know, I've been looking at the Israeli, a very small group of courts in Israel, which has been written up now and studied, because they had a research study published about it, where they're really applying therapeutic jurisprudence to these, what they like to call high conflict divorce cases. That, of course, they're not high conflict, they're abuse cases. But one of the things that they are doing is insisting that, first of all, the judges are trained. Second of all, there are mental health people in the court. Third of all, they allow children to have a voice. I think it's so important to understand that every child that I have met in my long career knows what's going on, even if the parent has never talked to them, even if the parent has tried to protect them in every way that they can, and they know. And they are, if they are given the ability to talk
not necessarily to a judge, because a lot of the judges don't want to do it, they're just not suited to do it, but to talk to a child therapist, somebody who knows children, not somebody who's not trained with a child but wants to do this kind of work, then they are able to talk about what they need. And then we have to respect their needs. That doesn't mean that they're gonna choose who they get to live with or the system they get to live with, because their preference may not be the best for them. But at least they get to voice it, talk about it, and try to get some understanding about compromise. And I think we need to respect children, and we need to understand that they can, to the best of their ability, my pediatrician friend, they can tell us what they need if we really learn how to listen to them.
I think, Steve, I'm going to give you the last question before we ask Larry to come on up.
So, very well aware now, I don't think these are like new concepts, cops responding to schizophrenics, other seriously mental ill, autism spectrum disorder. So, there's been some examples I've heard of positive things, all the big time DSM-5 diagnoses. So, where do you two see that going in terms of first responders, the whole idea that, like, some people are violent and criminals, they're sociopaths, but a lot of people that have mental illness are not violent and criminals.
When I was teaching at the university, I was part of a team that did the training for first responders.
Yeah.
And the truth is, there are some who are fabulous. They're wonderful, and they're a pleasure to work with. There are some who simply, for whatever reasons, don't get it. And so I think it's not gonna be a panacea, but the more we train, the better it's gonna be. And so I suggest that we keep doing it, and we do triaging a little bit better.
I just want to add to, back in 1997 in Memphis, there was a shooting by a police officer of a young man with serious mental illness. That led to the implementation of what we called across America of the CIT program. We've all heard of that, right? The crisis intervention training program where law enforcement officers would effectively be trained how to respond and, deal effectively with people that might suffer from various mental health disorders, correct, without, threat of harm. I think that honestly, and I was on a national circuit under Janet Reno with the head of the initial CIT program out of Memphis, Sam Cochran. But I really think the better solution, I think that's important. I think the training is essential across all law enforcement, but I also think these alternative responses that are clinical in nature, that don't involve law enforcement, really eliminate a good portion of that risk. And so these kind of crisis response teams that we have in Broward, we need more of them. They're mobile crisis. You call them up. I remember, well, I guess we're being recorded. I guess it's okay. I was at a hairdresser. I was getting my hair down in Hollandale. This is a true story. I have to put people under oath when I tell it, that they won't share it. And I had my hair like all in these foils, covered in foil. And there's an older person, a woman, and we didn't talk about our seniors, but we should. Because it's so important to make sure that our seniors are getting the care and the attention that they need due to loneliness, due to poverty, due to this and that. But the bottom line is this poor woman in this hair salon was really having such a hard time, and I recognized it as a mental health problem. And I called the mobile crisis team, and sure enough, the mobile crisis team came all the way down from Fort Lauderdale to Hollandale, and that woman was hospitalized. And yes, I put the mobile crisis team under oath that they did not see me in foils. But I mean, these teams are extraordinary. And again, it eliminates the risk of harm because they're not carrying weapons, they're carrying their own clinical knowledge on how to relate to people and de-escalate problems.
I think one of the things I just want to, I know we'll end with, is that Ginger and I spent a lot of time training students and in real life situations. I worry about technology. I think technology is going to be our friend if we can harness it, but it also has the opportunity to distance people from the contact, the real contact with people. And so much of the work, I would take my students into her courtroom, and they would walk in there, and she would stop everything in the courtroom and introduce them to all of the people that she was working with. So when she talks about respecting people, she did not pretend that she could do something because she's the judge that they don't have to know about. It was transparent what was happening. And the students saw that and were shocked. They had never seen somebody come down off the bench and really talk to people in that way. So it's not just what we're saying, it's how you do it that makes such an important impression. And the more we take kids to see these different things, the more we educate children, the more we educate our new professionals, our young professionals, the more I think we're gonna become a gentler society. And I really hope that our Jewish children are not gonna shy away from the mental health professions. They're not going into it as much as we did. And you know, I don't know how to stimulate that, but it's a time for another discussion about that.
Thank you. And I'll let you know, 2 winters ago, we brought our teens down to the Religious Action Center's Lit.Ken program, where they advocate towards their senators and congressmen for various initiatives. And most of our teens who are there chose the topic of mental health awareness. So I'm very proud of our teens. There's so much more we could talk about today. I'm so deeply honored that the 2 of you, and as well as Senator Lesniak, joined us this morning. Earlier today, Toby was referring to this man as Chuck. Half of you know him as Larry. I had to work that into the wedding speech I gave him and his wife so that people wouldn't be confused, thinking I wasn't talking about the right individual at their wedding. So I'm going to invite Larry/Chuck up here to say a few words to close us out.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for this amazing panel. Those who know me know I'm a pediatrician, so I approach things from something of a healthcare perspective and a child perspective. Those who know me really well will know that I skipped 2nd grade, so my handwriting is terrible, and I got cramps taking notes, so I hope that I'm going to be able to read what I wrote. But in listening to this, it occurred to me that thinking about this issue of mental health as social justice, this overarching piece, it might be useful to overlay very lightly some medical principles. The first principle in medical care is primum non nocere, first do no harm. And that comes actually from Hippocrates and maybe before. In modern healthcare and modern bioethics, that's manifest by 4 principles. The principles of autonomy, the nature of itself to be responsible and allowed to be responsible for itself. Beneficence, doing good. Non-maleficence, not doing harm. And justice. And justice in modern philosophical discourse has been somewhat controversial, but I want to focus on the framing of John Rawls, who was one of the first to use the term social justice. And he talked about justice as fairness. And in a just society, it needed to ensure that any social and economic or other disparities actually benefited the least advantaged among them. And he used a thought experiment called the original position, in which he said, let's imagine that we have a veil of ignorance that keeps us from knowing any of our own characteristics. And if we had that veil of ignorance, how would we decide on what constitutes justice? And I think that that's an important and useful thing as we think about this, because the phrase that comes to mind is, there but for the grace of God, go any of us. So Senator Lesniak gave us a beautiful story about the New Jersey experience. He reminded us that the courts and jail are unfair and ineffective when it comes to dealing with serious mental illness, and that diversion works, and that there's data to show that it works. He talked about the fact that 10 years in, we were not yet using what we know and what we've learned within the state. In medicine, it was recently, well, probably 10, 15 years ago, described that it typically takes greater than 15 years for any discovery of an effective innovation to be implemented. And that actually has helped to develop a new area of study and practice called implementation science. And so, and I'm going to bring that to bear with what some of Lenore said. But what I was struck by, Lenore, with how you began, was the power of 2 things, the power and importance. One is naming something. We have a much harder time grasping constructs than we do building concrete ideas around a name, because these things are not concrete, none of this. So it's a way of dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty is to provide a name. And the other thing that's so important is for us to make sure that our receivers are tuned to the frequency of the signals being sent. So the doctors, the police, the courts need to understand who their stakeholders are and how they can understand and then communicate back with them. Because without that, without the development of relationships, we have terrible problems. And in medicine, the example that came to mind was there's something now known as, I have to always look at it, but it's myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, which for years, women who would complain of this vague illness, just not having enough energy, etc., would be told that it was all in their heads. But we now have a name, and now it's not, and it's finally being dealt with. We heard about from Lenore the power struggle as it relates to custody. I'll say a little bit more about that, and actually Toby and I, something we took on some years. But what she also said, which is very striking in this current world, in the New York Times today, there was an article that said a class that's disappearing in Washington is the expert class. But she talked about the fact that the courts didn't listen, and they often don't listen or recognize who are truly the experts in there. She also related to this principle of autonomy. And this is one of the real key issues here, is because autonomy and holding someone accountable as an autonomous entity requires them to have both control and choices. And in self-defense, there is not the choice. And in mental illness, there is often not the control. Or in the case of anxiety, autism, which is not a mental illness, but a neurodivergent condition. So I think it's really important. And then what we saw in what Lenore did and how she's lived her career was really what exemplifies the notion of implementation science or implementation. She identified an idea, she developed it through research, she trained others in it, and she's applied it in courts and other contexts. So I think that's there. And she's even applied the science to people who she wouldn't admire. So you have to follow the science where it goes. Even when you don't like it, it's important to do that, because otherwise it's not honest. It's equally dishonest as it is to just dismiss the science. Resilience. This brought me to another naming opportunity that I don't think Lenore had. Actually, I'll tell you, I wrote an article many years ago, I think 1994 or 95, that was the second most cited article in a particular journal.
Wow.
Yeah, no, in this issue of a journal. There were 34 citations of my articles, which is not bad. There were 30,000 of the other, which is the one that named ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Oh, yeah.
So when we think about life, there are bad things that happen early in life. And the question is, can we be resilient to it? And adverse childhood experiences, the first description was, I think, 9 or 10. 8, so, yeah. And it's now been increased. There's about a dozen or so that are recognized. And, but ACEs are maldistributed in terms of social determinants of health. So there's lack of justice there. And we know the single most important resilience factor for ACEs is a single trusting adult relationship. That gets amped up if it's a loving relationship and amped up further if it's more than one. But so there's a whole field now in pediatrics of early relational health that relates to how this can be promoted in the clinical setting in pediatrics. Now, the judge also talked a little differently about notions of autonomy. The notion of public guardianship is actually a formal recognition of the lack of autonomy by the legal system. And she also talked to us about how in the success of the mental health court, it's that relationships and respect were key. So I think this is another theme that we see that carries throughout what we heard. The notion of therapeutic jurisprudence is it's important to find ways to give voice and allow folks to feel heard. That resonated to me as a physician because I started my career as a National Health Service Corps doc. That means taking care of very poor people. And one of the first things I ever wrote talked about the importance of sharing your own vulnerabilities with people who might view you as above them in order to be able to relate. And so it really, it harkened back to the beginning of my career. But I think this notion of dignity, respect, and compassion is so much there. I'm going to be quick now to the panel, but I think the notion of primary prevention that Phil raised and the panel discussed is critical. I think that my sister Marcia just arrived, but I want to acknowledge Lenore was talking about abuse and defense, and Marcia went to another place with it and helped to create law in New Jersey, where in the defense phase of death penalty trials, childhood abuse became something that could be viewed as a mitigating factor. I also want to acknowledge something that Toby did. We actually did it together, but she pushed me into it. When I was on the faculty at the Harvard School of Public Health, we created a course called Social Policy and Legal Dilemmas, Child Custody and Visitation in the Context of Domestic Violence.
And this related to what Lenore was talking
I
about.
still hear from some of our students.
Oh, that's awesome. And it actually was acknowledged by the school as for high student ratings. It's really important, because the other thing that we talked about, and I'm gonna leave it with this, because this may then be something that could set up conversation later on over lunch. The thing that we identified as we were planning the course was the vocabulary of the legal system and the medical system overlapped, but they didn't mean the same things. So, for example, in the legal system, risk is a binary condition. It either exists or it doesn't. In medical field and in public health, risk is a proportion, it's a percentage. It is not binary. So there's always some risk. So what happened was language was used and it was not being used as intended. It was not being heard as intended by the courts. And I think that's really, really important. I guess I lied, I'm gonna say one more thing. In the modern healthcare system, rules-based algorithmic healthcare creates the same problems that it does in the legal system, because there is no value to continuity, no value to the relationships, and no space that's permitted to manage ambiguity, uncertainty, or nuance as it really exists in the real world. So with that, I want to thank you, Ginger, and thank you, Lenore.
I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank the Kleinman family as well as our speakers. This was a deeply powerful morning. I promise you that Dr. Walker's book will be in the library for you to take out once I read it. And I believe lunch is served upstairs in Lippman Hall. We'd love for you to join us for lunch.
David, I don't know what you guys are doing this posting or last night. Yeah. We're going down to Working Dog Winery. They have music. I don't know if that interests you. No, it's from 1 to 5 down there. We're going to have lunch and then head down. I think it's going to be nice though. What's wrong with her car?
She went to go to the nails done, and I got an alert on my phone. The tire was there. She's looking a real alert. And of course, the tire is low, so my guess is she got it down. And goes, I haven't seen it yet. Always time. And those tires are
The run car? Yeah, the run car.
well, not even like
Yeah, that's you can drive the car with That's why you don't have the spare time.
Look at it. I'm getting a picture.
Yes, David is not.
All right, you're going up to lunch?
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure, thank you so much.
All right, did I do okay?
Oh, yeah.
Singing it.
No, that's okay.
Jay's first.